Hey YouTube, how's it going? So, I'm sitting here smoking and I've decided to make another video. 2 videos in 2 days, which is crazy for me these days. But I was thinking a lot recently about what a book is, and what the value of reading a book is. I find I'm amazed by the amount of people who don't like to read, or don't place a high value on it, who will either try and find summaries of texts, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, if you like, Wikipedia, whatever. They just want the distilled argument rather than going to a book, right? But the argument that, or the example that I run into the most is when I find people talking about Kant, for instance. I've read The Critique of Pure Reason, right? Book changed my life in many ways. And I find people they want to know what's in there, but they don't want to engage with the text. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I think a book is and why it's important that we read books, especially on subjects that we have some interest in, especially books that we disagree with. And this is sort of an ethos that I want to try and, I guess I'm thinking more about social issues for some reason. I can't really pin down why, but this is somehow related to that in my mind. But I'll just bracket that question. When I read a book, what is a good book is the question, not just what is a book. What is a good book? And I think a good book is a book that is going to challenge you to think in different ways, right? We as humans, I think, are afflicted with terrible bias, right? We are afflicted with this ability to dismiss and to remove or label as preposterous everything that we sort of don't already agree with. And therefore what we end up settling on as being the truth or true or whatever positions that we hold, I think all too often end up being positions that we affirmed in the first place and we're just beginning to clarify. And so I think that we have a tendency to say something like, or to assume that a good book is a book that tells what we already have deemed to be the truth, right? We like to read texts that sort of cheer on our biases, right? And I just don't think that that's good method or good practice. And we also have this terrible propensity to take things that we don't understand or that are unclear and just dismiss them. None of that is good, right? I think that there's real value in doing the work, right? It wrestling with something that we find to be unclear or indistinct, to try and come up with an interpretation, if only because interpretation is so fundamental to what I think it is to be a human being, right? Engaging in a sort of dialogue with a text rather than simply having everything spoon-fed to you, right? Do I agree with the premises? Okay, check. Okay, I guess this is the conclusion, right? Something like that, right? That's a sound argument, therefore that's a good piece of text, right? That's it. That's not the project that interests me. Not to denigrate good arguments, right? The example I gave before was the Critique of Pure Reason by Kant. Reading that text, the reason why that's a text that means so much to me is because in reading it, it forced me to, just in order to come to grips with it, in order to even attempt to interpret it, right? To sort of get a hold of what's going on in that book. I had to think in a radically different way than I would if just left to my own devices, and that sort of opens up space in my intellect, in my mind. It's a new tool, right? It's like in attempting to speak a different language, making your mouth move in unfamiliar ways feels awkward and difficult, and then eventually over time you gain some level of mastery, ideally. At least there's that potential in the mind, and I feel like the same thing, or in the mouth, and I feel like the same thing is true about the mind. So lack of clarity, or reading something that's at least initially unclear or difficult to come to grips with, doesn't strike me as a value in itself, even if you end up coming to the conclusion that in the end, whatever it is that you're reading is incoherent. The attempt to make sense of something is a form of exercise for the brain, and that's something that I just take to be extremely valuable. So much of my engagement with people like Derrida, the postmodernists, right? Trying to read them in a way that I can distill something out of it, right? That I can dig out an interpretation that speaks to me, even though the text is so difficult, right? That's a project that is interesting. It forces me to think in new ways, right? And so this is why I like people like someone like Derrida, Nietzsche writing in an aphoristic style, right? Highly interpretable text, right? All of Nietzsche's writing is sort of scattered and all over the place and very contradictory in places, and trying to interpret that in a way that speaks to me, right? In a way that I can develop insights for myself, right? Is a project that's valuable. So there's this question of a dialogue with a book, right? And with respect to the Critique of Pure Reason, there are many ways in which I just don't agree with Kant, right? But there are many things that he says in there that, in order to sort out why I don't agree with him, I had to stretch in one way or another. I had to grow intellectually, and so even if in the end I don't necessarily call myself a Kantian, I still find my intellectual activity being extremely indebted to the engagement with that text, and that's the measure of a great of a great book for me, or a great intellectual engagement, right? You find yourself not agreeing with something and you can't quite clarify why, and then you think about it, right? Well, why don't I agree with this? Maybe they're right, but it doesn't quite feel right. How do I articulate the thing that I'm trying to, why am I objecting? And right, and this is a project of, when you read a book, it's not a project of just finding the argument. It becomes a project of self-knowledge. It becomes a project of learning who you are and how you feel about things, and expanding your own intellectual landscape in such a way that you can articulate things, new things. That's growth. So that's what I'd say. I'd say that the measure of a good book is not necessarily a book that that I agree with, right? It's the measure of an interaction, right? Like, for instance, if I have friends that I disagree with about a great many things, but I still engage with them, and I still find my interactions with them to be valuable and interesting and productive in one way or another. And I feel this way about books, right? That's an interaction. It's a dialogue, and it's a dialogue through which I learn something about myself, and I grow and I stretch myself in order to deal with what's going on there. So yeah, it's just a few thoughts on what I take a book to be, and why I think, I mean, this is really called hermeneutics, right? Why I think that hermeneutic project is something of value. And I mentioned that this has something to do with thinking about politics a little bit more. And maybe that it's the fact that this is the lens through which I'd like to engage with that sort of subject, and with people in the social justice community and the people perhaps against them as well, is the lens of not to agree, right? Not to affirm, but to engage in some kind of dialectic. And yeah, I mean, you can look at YouTube videos as a text in this sense. I don't have to agree with the text to love it. And I think that there's a duty, the principle of what I take to be the principle of charity. There's a duty in even with people that you severely disagree with, searching for something of value, be it the engagement, be it the deployment of criticism, or be it translating and paring away things that sound crazy, looking for nuggets of insight that speak to you in some meaningful way. So yeah, that's my attitude towards reading books, and I'd hope to, I guess, if I'm thinking more about politics, or for some reason I'm actually interested in having this conversation with people engaged in the quote-unquote social justice community, and people against them, I guess, as well. That's sort of the spirit in which I'd like to conduct that activity. So, yeah. Have a good day.